a nice walk around and look for some butterflies in nice sunshine. But it's cold and miserable, so we're not going to see many butterflies, I suspect. But what I will do is I will walk around what will be the route we use for the formal butterfly survey, show you some bits of the site that result from that, and have a talk about what the site's got, what we might be able to see, and look at some plants and maybe some insects and some birds and things that are flying. So we will go and do that. The route I'm going to follow is one I use for the formal butterfly survey that I do here. And that's a survey that we do once a week from April through to the end of September. And in that survey, what we do is we walk a fixed route, which is broadly the route we're going to go today, and we count the butterflies in a 5 metre box, imagine a 5 metre box around us. We don't actually carry a box. And that lets us get a systematic survey of what's going on. Now, this is a public site, so there'll be lots of people, so I will be sort of occasionally trying to duck, so I'm not broadcasting people without their permission. And we'll see what happens. But we're going to have a walk around now, so in a second I'm going to turn the camera around and we will go and see what is going on. So we're walking up here, up the cycle track, the side of Horsenden Hill. The survey I'm looking at today, the route we're going to go today, is mainly on the lower fields. Well, it's all on the lower fields. There is a separate survey that my friend Martin does that goes up the hill and does the butterfly survey up there. But the survey I do on this site is mainly on the lower fields, which is where we're going to go. This stretch has got quite a lot of elm tree on it, and this is quite a good stretch of the site later in the year for a butterfly called the white letter hairstreak. It's a butterfly associated with elm, and its population has therefore declined somewhat since Dutch elm disease has affected the elm populations here in the UK, and there's fewer of the plants and fewer therefore places for the caterpillars to feed, for the butterflies to emerge from. But there is still quite a bit of elm here, typically young elm, typically suckering growth elm. So later in the year this section produces quite decent numbers of white letter hairstreak butterflies, and if people are interested in those, I will probably do a broadcast about them when they're on the wing. But also, COVID lockdown type restrictions permitting, I will be leading a walk around this site in late June, where we'll show people those and some of the other butterflies and some of the other wildlife that we've got here. So that will be something I do with my friends from Butterfly Conservation. It'll be a nice opportunity for people to come and see the site in person. So I should say where we are, of course, that's out at the start. This is Horsenden Hill. It's in the London borough of Ealing, in northwest London, essentially. And what we're doing today is just having a look, really using the butterfly transect route, butterfly survey route, as a particular route through the site to have a look at what we see. So we see, as we come over here to the other side, one of Ealing's interpretation boards that explains what the site is, Horsenden West. Don't particularly need to look at that, but there's a few of these about, so people are visiting the site and don't know it, it does help them. And you can see, we're getting into spring. Flowers are now starting to emerge. So down here, we've got some red dead nettles, these sort of pinkish reddish flowers called red dead nettle. And these white ones are greater stitchwort with some lesser celandine, the yellow flower, underneath. So the flowers are starting to come, and that's all good nectar source for the insects as well. And we may well see a few insects visiting some flowers as we go around. You can also see, if I point up a little bit, the blackthorn is in flower, and blackthorn has this really wonderful white flower. It's a really obvious, attractive sign of spring that you've got this mass of white coloration in the hedges that really flowers before a lot of the leaves are on plants. A lot of the leaves are on the hedgerow plants, and so it really stands out as this wonderful white, bright pattern. That's one of the signs of spring. So this that we're coming into now is Batsfield. Most of the names of the fields here are taken from old maps of the site and were probably the name of the people who owned them. It was probably a Mr. Bat rather than being named because it has lots of bats in it. But this is one of the floristically and entomologically more diverse of the meadows on the site. If I was doing the transect properly, the proper route, I wouldn't be cutting across towards this patch of flowers because the route goes round the outside, but because we're not doing that survey route properly, we can go and have a look at these cowslips, which you can probably see as the yellow flowers, a little patch of yellow flowers in the middle. And as the season goes on and as spring and summer comes round, this meadow gets a lot more flowers, a lot richer in flowers, a lot richer in associated insects. But we'll stop here and have a look at these cowslips. They're a type of primula or primrose family. And you can see from the shape of the flowers here that to some extent they're designed to encourage the insects to really sort of force their way in and get covered with pollen and act as pollinators. And you can probably also see, by focusing on this flower down here, these sort of red dots in the middle. And the thinking is that they are probably a bit like guidelines to the insects, to the bees and things that are pollinating this, saying, look, in here, this is where the nectar is, come in, dig down in here. And that should attract insects to pollinate them. A nice little clump there of cowslip growing in the middle of this bit of the field. It's a little clump, not quite sure why, it's just this one little patch seems to have them in. But it does seem to be, that's the way it is, this little clump, this little stretch. There's nothing obvious on the ground that's telling me why it's here. The plants are called cowslip because it was thought that they grew out of cowpats originally. That was the theory, that was where we're perhaps because those were areas of the field that were particularly richly fertilised. But this field, if it's ever been grazed by cattle, I'd be very surprised if it's happened within living memory. So that's not why they've chosen this little stretch of the field, but there we are. So we'll go over here and see we're approaching more of that blackthorn in blossom. A really lovely plant. And it's the food source for the caterpillars of a butterfly called the brown hairstreak. It's quite a rare butterfly in Britain. Quite difficult to find as well. One of the main ways we find it is to go in winter when there's no blossom and no leaves and carefully look for the eggs on these hedges here. I've never successfully found it on this site, but other people have. So that's good to know it's here. I really hope I will be able to find the adults on the wing one year, but never had any luck at that so far. Go up this section of the field further. On the left here, we've got a clump of, well, several trees, but quite a lot of them are aspen. Aspen's a tree in the poplar family. And another interesting insect we have on this site, which is associated with this tree, is one called the light orange underwing moth. And it's a moth that emerges quite early as an adult, March, April time, so it's on the wing now. And it spends most of its time up there in the canopy of these aspens, flying around in sunny days, laying its eggs, and generally being hard to see. It's regarded as a nationally scarce species, something that is not common in Britain. In part, I suspect that status might be because it's quite difficult to survey. You've got to know to look up, you've got to hit the right day, so there's none of them moving today because it's dull and cold and nothing's flying. And even if you see them flying, there's another somewhat common, but still not very common species called the orange underwing, rather than the light orange underwing, which has a very similar habit, very similar behaviour, and you've got to get a reasonably good look at them to tell them apart. They have differences in the structure of the antennae in the males, and they have differences in the patterns on the underside of the wings for males and females. But as you can imagine, they're flitting about up there. You're not going to see either of those features, so you've got to either get some really good quality photos and hope you can make out the feature. And I've had some success with that, just pointing a big zoom lens on an SLR at this and taking 200 pictures, and one of them has the relevant feature on. Or you have to hope that they do come down occasionally and you can get one in a net, get one in a pot, have a look at the relevant feature. So we have confirmed that these are light orange underwing here. We've never confirmed orange underwing on this site, so I'm reasonably confident when I'm seeing them on sunny days that is the species that we're getting here. You can also see birds possibly flying. There's a long-tailed tit up in the tree ahead, and many of the spring migrant, long-tailed tit is not a spring migrant of course, but many of the spring migrant birds are now arriving, so you should be able to hear quite a lot of blackcaps and chiffchaffs as we go around. Chiffchaff's perhaps the easiest one to pick out and describe because the bird essentially sings its name. It goes chiff-chaff, chiff-chaff, chiff-chaff. Doesn't really, I mean, but it has that sort of two-part note. Fairly distinctive when you get your ear in. So this section of the survey again takes us through what's quite a nice field as we come into summer. Takes us past these aspens. Lets me hopefully sometimes get the light orange underwings onto the formal but recorded survey as well, which is always nice. Surveys do try to record all the moths and indeed other insects we see on these surveys if we possibly can. So if we were doing the formal butterfly transect formal survey, we'd stop here quick and pick note of everything we've seen and move on to this, which is the next section. And we'll be moving into another of the fields. Again, this site is maintained to a large extent for nature, although obviously there's public access, and see a gentleman here walking 3 rather large dogs. But the Ely Council do a good job of trying to look after these sites and maintain them for wildlife. The way they do that with these grasslands is that once a year they are cut mechanically on this side of the site. So you send in a machine, you cut everything down quite late in the season when most of the flowers are finished, when most things have set seed, and you take off the material that you've cut. And that takes the nutrients away, and you want to take nutrients away from conservation grassland, because if you have too many nutrients on it, all you have is a small number of species that really make use of the nutrients, quite a lot of rank grass. So if you want your floristically diverse habitat, you want your habitats that are more interesting for insects and for birds and for small mammals, you really need to control nutrients, and you need to either graze or mechanically cut or manage the site in some way. And that's how this site is done. It's mechanically cut once a year, late in the season. people shouting at their dogs. I'm not a great fan of dogs, I have to say. People seem to spend a lot of their time shouting at them and vaguely hoping that they actually follow instructions. But there we go. You see a few crows flying over. Very common bird carrying crow, of course. Hello, Fiona. We are just walking around the Horsenden transect route. So yes, lots of crows flying over, and there is quite a big crow roost around this site and in Perivale Wood, which we formally survey once a year. You can probably see up ahead where the route through the hedge line is just one path. It's very trampled at the moment. It's always a bit more. Great spotted woodpecker shouting. Possibly you can hear that. Oh, we're not going to get any butterflies on this walk, Fiona. It's just using it as an excuse for the route around the site. I thought I'd use this route anyway. As I was going to say, yes, the track here is very, it's always a bit worn because it's where all the people go, but particularly this year, the amount of people on site, because people haven't been allowed to go anywhere because shops and pubs and bars and cafes and all of those things have been shut. More and more people have been visiting their local sites, and the ground is really compacted in places like this. I mean, it's great, people are getting out and enjoying and hopefully valuing their countryside and hopefully supporting the work that's done to maintain it. Let's go that way so we're not broadcasting people. There we go. But it is putting a lot of pressure on management of sites locally. Just the sheer volume of people visiting, way beyond what has been there before. So anyway, coming to another of the fields, and again you see lots more of that lovely blossoming blackthorn. Lovely white standing out in the hedges really clearly from everything else. You can see the oak trees are still quite bare, not really coming into leaf yet. Rather stark looking, but a lot of the hedge plants, the hawthorns and such like, are now leafing up and becoming green and becoming vibrant and becoming lovely food for caterpillars. And the caterpillars become lovely food for birds, and then the birds become food for other birds, and so on and so forth. So it's rather nice. Just wish the weather was a little bit warmer today, and then we might get to see something flying. All I've really had on the wing today are, well, insect-wise anyway, are 3 or 4 buff-tailed bumblebee queens. Really not been much about, unfortunately. But still nice to be out, still better to be out. There's a green woodpecker just jumped across the field. You won't be able to see that. Just the crows and ring-necked parakeets shouting loudly overhead. Not a native species here in Britain, but they've been accidentally introduced, possibly deliberately introduced, and have established themselves. Certainly down here in the London area, they're pretty common. I think they're spreading a bit around the country. There's a green woodpecker flying across again. I suspect that may not have shown up very well. It was a bit distant for Periscope, not Periscope anymore, perhaps, or Twitter or Facebook or wherever you're watching this from. One of the other things that you get when you know a site well, when you spend a lot of time working a site, is you start to identify particular places where there's a good chance of particular things. So let's have a look and see if it's there. But that broken tree about in the centre of the image now, just to the left of the gap in the hedge, that broken bit of tree with the top broken off is often quite a good place for a little owl to sit. I'd say about one visit in 4 or so. It's there. Doesn't look like this is one of those visits. But again, it's one of the things, because I visit this site a lot, because I spend a lot of time keeping an eye on what's here, you start to notice and know little places, particular features. So off to the right is part of the site that's managed for recreation, as playing fields. There's quite a lot of people out there doing sport, which I guess is now a permitted activity, so it must be good for those who enjoy such things to have the opportunity to get together and kick balls around and run and do all those exciting things. Personally, I'd much rather be wandering around looking for exciting wildlife, but to each their own. But that side of the site is managed quite differently. It's managed as shortcut former playing fields, much less ecological interest, of course, but an important community resource, an important value to people. Let's have another quick check of the little elm tree, just in case. There is a wood pigeon up there. It's not very exciting, of course. Doesn't look like the owl's behaving. Let's zoom in on the wood pigeon just for the sake of it. That wasn't it flying, that's... Whoops. That's about... There's 2 of them there. About central. Probably a little bit low quality image. That's zoomed in. So we'll zoom back out and keep on with the walking. That's a parakeet shouting loudly that you can hear. Again, you can see the ground here is very compacted, where everyone's narrowly focused through the same area to get through the hedges. There's also some signs of mechanical access where either the ranger team or the gas board, or the gas company maintaining the gas pipelines here, which run underneath the site, will have been accessing with the vehicle. Another lovely long blackthorn hedge, looking splendidly white in its spring flora. There's a blue tip just moving around in there, type of bird. And you can probably hear lots of people doing sport off the other side of the hedge. So this would also be part of the butterfly survey route that we would do. And we'll be counting all the butterflies that we see. I'm just hoping the weather gets a bit warmer this weekend, because you need a minimum temperature of 10 degrees before the data can even be entered into the system. And so far, it's not got above 9 today. There's a dunnock just flew into the hedge there. More people. At least these ones have got their dogs on leads. It does reduce disturbance quite a lot if you keep your dog on a lead and under control. And down at the end of here, we've got one of the ponds that's on the site. The site's not really got extensive wetland on it. It's not got big lakes or big bodies of water, but it's got several ponds. They are quite interesting. They're quite a different variety of habitat. Quite nice reed beds. I'll probably do a separate broadcast on reed beds at some point in the year, maybe later on in the year when we are doing an event for something called National Moth Night, which this year is targeted and focused on recording reed bed species. So I'll probably do something about reed beds and what we know about them in the area later in the year. I think that's July, that will be. But it is quite a nice, different bit of site, different bit of habitat. Got a lot of willow there as well. Again, so that's a tree that's associated with wetland, a bit of birch. So different species, different plants, and again, lots and lots of the blackthorn along the front, along the hedge line in its white flowers. Off to the right, beyond where that pond is, and beyond the sort of the distant hedge line, you can see is the Paddington branch of the Grand Union Canal. Okay, so that's a nice sort of ribbon of water that runs through the site. Provides again a bit of variety in habitat. A few water birds on it. It's a canal, it's artificial, it's canalised, it's got quite solid built up banks, so it's not going to get the sort of stuff you would get on a lovely winding river system, but nevertheless it's adding variety to what's on the site. A couple of gulls flying. Might be able to see quite distantly over the trees. Herring gull, that one is. There's also quite a few lesser black-backed gulls flying around. And some gold finch off in the trees as well. So we're coming up now to a field that is managed slightly differently to the way the rest of these fields are managed. So I was talking before about the way the fields were managed by doing a mechanical cut quite late in the season, taking off the material you've cut, taking away that sort of rich nutrient and leaving the opportunity for the plants and flowers that need less nutrient-rich soil to grow, develop. The site, the bit we're coming to now, surrounded by these hedges, goes by the name of the Plough, and that perhaps suggests the way for quite a while it has been managed, which is either instead of or as well as that mechanical cut I talked about. A plough is taken through here either late in the year or early in the year, either late autumn or early spring, and the ground is churned up and turned over. So it's a rather different bit of habitat. It's also somewhat less accessed by people, although it's, as you can see, there's nothing that would stop anyone walking in here. And on a couple of occasions it has been planted with a seed mix. Predominantly it seems of annuals and so on. Not necessarily what I would choose if I was supreme dictator of how this site should be managed, but I'm not. There's legitimate reasons to think of managing it that way. It's certainly in some years it's produced as a very visually attractive spectacle of flowers which people have enjoyed. I would to some extent rather it was managed by letting stuff develop and arrive and grow as it wants to. But it does provide a variety and does provide a different habitat, and that difference of management, again, that's a really important thing. Managing sites for variety can be really important when you're thinking about maintaining sites for nature. And that's part of it. You can see here some of the illustrations of some of the descriptions of how they manage the meadows, and that's the closest to seeing a butterfly I suspect we're going to get today, is seeing a picture of a common blue on an ox-eye daisy. And you can see here one of the interesting and perennial issues on this site is that under where I'm walking now there is a gas main, low pressure gas main I think it is. It's certainly got the odour agents in the gas, so that suggests it's at low pressure. But it's often just gently leaking, so there is often quite a strong gas smell along here, and sometimes you'll see gas bubbling up through the water. So every so often someone from National Grid Gas comes along, puts some fences up, digs the hole, tries to do a bit of a repair, but it does seem that it's a regular problem. It's been going on for 10-20 years that that's been happening here. As far as I'm aware, the fact that there's occasionally gas bubbling up to the ground is having no effect on any of the wildlife that's here. But I haven't really done an in-depth study of that, so it might be. You can see here the ground has been very muddy and has dried. There's lots of bare patches, partly where it's been dug up as part of that work, and partly because this is where a lot of people walk again, and that just compacts the ground and prevents the plants growing. Not much you can do about it on a site with public access. You want public access to sites if you can, because you want people to enjoy what's here. Have a quick look at this tree. One of the things that has been being done across several of the sites around here at the moment is a bit of work to try and encourage owls to be present on the site. I think the aspiration is to get breeding barn owl on the site. It's not impossible. Barn owls have been seen in the area, they've been seen here. They have bred here in the past, but boxes like this are put up on the tree, designed as owl boxes. Never seen an owl in this one, but we do have little owl and tawny owl on the site regularly. And who knows, we might get barn owl established. So we'll keep going a bit further on, going a bit further along what would be the survey route. Cut through here into another of our fields, like one of the fields we went through the top of before. And later in the year, of course, the grass is much taller than it is here. You get a lot more butterflies using it. It gives you another sight. So we're coming back towards Bats Field, which was one of the fields we started in, the one I was talking about being one of the more floristically rich fields. We don't actually go back into it, we turned right just before. So the survey route is picking up a different bit of the habitat. However, this site probably says one of the less butterfly bits of the survey route that we did. Nothing wrong with it, it's still a perfectly nice and well managed bit of meadow. It just doesn't seem to quite have the variety some of the other areas do. But when we're designing these surveys, it's important to try and route them through a variety of bits of the site. The wind noise is bad there. Not sure there's much I can do about that. I might have to invest in a Bluetooth microphone set or something for doing these things outside. I seem to be having a few connection issues. I may have disappeared for a moment there. It says I've got a great signal. Again, there's a few people walking up, so I'll just point this a bit to the side so I'm not broadcasting them against their will. They're in public, they can't technically object to it happening, but it's not courteous, so I'll do that so that we're not showing people against their will. Right, past them now, so we'll go back to straight. And another of our hedge lines, quite broad hedge lines we have here, probably because they've grown much wider than they were originally. But a lot of the hedge lines here are old. We have maps, I think, going back to the 17th or 18th century, I think, possibly earlier. And some of the hedge lines we have now are shown on those maps and likely to have been, to a greater or lesser extent, continuously a hedge line since then. So they're quite interesting features. They're relatively old, and that means things have had plenty of opportunity to establish their populations in them. And managing those hedge lines and maintaining those, again, is a really important part of how this site is managed and looked after. You can see that stuff like this. There was a bumblebee, buff-tailed bumblebee just flew through. Didn't stop anywhere where I could show it to anyone. So maintaining these hedge lines, but also stopping them. If you just let them, they would gradually over the years inch out and take over more and more of the meadow. So they do need to be cut back, they do need to be managed. And in modern times when human labour is expensive, you can't really do that by traditional methods like hedge laying. So there is a degree of quite heavy occasional mechanical cutting of these with a flail. It looks very aggressive when it's done. It looks horrible when it's done. It looks like it's trashed the place, to be honest. But as you can see, this was done a few years ago. This was hacked back. Looked absolutely hideously butchered. And it doesn't now. It looks great. So that's it's a good part of the management of the site. Always difficult. Some great tits moving about in there. You might be able to hear them. And a bumblebee buzzing around my head. No idea if the microphone's picking up the bumblebee buzz, but there was a buff-tailed bumblebee buzzing around, probably looking for a combination of nectar and somewhere to build her nest. And then we're coming up here to Woodfield, which is the last of the fields. Again, this is another quite a nice field, quite an attractive field. It's got quite good flowers in it later in the season. And this is the bit of the site where when a species of butterfly called brown argus re-established itself here, this was the bit of the site where we were first finding it. And it's probably still the bit of the site where that species of butterfly is most easily found in sort of June time, June, July, whenever it's on the wing. So again, something about this, just some little variation in its exposure, how it's cut, the plants, the soil chemistry, something about it means it's slightly different, and you get a slightly different mix of things here. And this would be the last bit of the butterfly survey. You can see from this broadcast it's taking about 40 minutes to walk around it whilst talking. It typically takes a bit less than that when doing the butterfly survey. You're walking the slope to which is about reasonable. I guess lots of wind again. That takes us. You might be able to see some white things falling through the sky. That's not snow, although it almost feels cold enough that it could be. That's just the blackthorn blossom, some of that falling off and blowing through the air. And that is large again, and you can see here the point I was making, this bit of hawthorn here, just drawing out the edge, so coming out from the hedge line, a bit beyond the hedge line. And if that's not managed, in 5 years' time the hedge line would be here rather than here. And then in 5 years' time after that, the hedge line would be here, and gradually this whole area would turn to scrubland and then to rank woodland and so on. So it's quite important, if you want to maintain the diversity of habitat, you want to maintain the grasslands, that it be managed, that it be controlled and that it be maintained, which is all part of how the site is managed. So that will be largely taking us to the end of the survey route and the end of the transect. And hopefully tomorrow it'll be a little bit warmer and I can come and do this again with a net rather than a camera on a gimbal and actually record the butterflies for the survey. But we will end here on the sign reminding you where we are. So that was a quick wander around the lower part of Horsenden Hill, particularly using the route that we use